Welcome into the Batify podcast, aka the Ben and Travis podcast. I'm Travis Creasy, along with my partner Ben Hayes.
What's going on? Good to see you, or hear you guys, I guess, at this point. So,
well, I'm hoping to be able to see. Well, we've been doing Zoom and stuff like that, so we've seen each other, but hopefully be around each other before too long. But we're back for another episode of our podcast, and a podcast I've really enjoyed doing, where we talk about how God has showed up and showed out in difficult circumstances in people's lives. And today as always, it seems like I'm always talking about how excited we are for our guests, and that doesn't change this time. And obviously, it's somebody who's special to myself and you as well, Ben. It's my mom.
That's right. You better be excited about that.
Yeah, exactly. She's close enough that he can whoop me still. But who's been staying with us throughout the quarantine, helping with our kiddos and doing a little bit of homeschooling, which has probably been a challenge of its own. But Mom, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Not something I thought I'd ever do is homeschool, but I would suggest you not start with 4 and 5 year olds. But it's going along great, and I'm grateful that I'm able to be here instead of at home by myself trying to find something to do. I have plenty to do here.
Well, that's one thing about being here in Fayetteville with us, is there's never a let up on things to do. But other than my mom, she's known as Doris Creasy, and she's an awesome lady. Special place in my heart, obviously, and for Ben as well, I'm sure, and we'll talk about that. But I'm going to let you discuss and describe, what your job that you've done, just recently retired in the last few years, and then also talk about another person who's very special to all of us. So I'll let you do that.
Okay. I retired from the Postal Service last year in March, the end of March, and have thoroughly enjoyed it. People said you'll, get up one day and get to town and think you had to go to work. That has not happened one time. I haven't one time missed being out in the heat and the cold and all that, doing those things. I love my job, but I haven't missed it like I thought I would. Of course, I've stayed very, very busy. What they asked me to come on for is to discuss someone very dear to my heart, my son Bradley. He is 45 years old now, and was born with cerebral palsy. I was just past my 18th birthday when he was born, and by the time he was 19, he'd been diagnosed with cerebral palsy. And so I tell people, I grew up that day. I quickly realized it ain't about you anymore, Doris, and very, very terrifying time for me.
So by the time you were 19, he had been diagnosed?
Yes.
Wow.
He had been diagnosed, yes. He was born on March 14th, 1975, and he was diagnosed on March 31st, 1976. Funny how that sticks in your mind.
Yeah.
The exact dates. We knew something was going on. We knew something wasn't right. Even though it was my first child, I'd been around many, many children, having older brothers and sisters with children, and things just didn't add up. And but he was officially diagnosed in Birmingham that day, and I cried all the way home. I just was absolutely beside myself. All I could think was, he's going to have a terrible life. People are going to make fun of him. They're not going to love him. They're not going to, not the horrors of everything, but just the fact that this child will never be what is normal for a child. And that was a very terrifying time. And I remember getting home, and my aunt, I lived on her place, and she came over and was talking to me, and I was telling her how, just crying through it all and just saying he'll never have a good life. People won't understand him. They'll, and she stopped me and she said, "You're wrong. I think you're wrong, Doris." She said, "They'll love him more because of it." And it was like, that was exactly what it is. I mean, everybody loves Bradley. He's just a very unique individual, and I don't have to tell you. Try that. And the things that I'll talk about are heartbreaking, but I want to say this at the beginning: he's never been anything but a blessing.
Absolutely.
All that we went through, he has always been a blessing. And what's normal for him is not normal for everybody else, but he still loves life.
And the interesting thing to me is technically he's my half brother, but other than the last name, that's never crossed my mind or really been a part of the equation. And he adopts people. He's probably adopted many other children and many other family members before we ever adopted our two. And maybe that's where we got it from. But
I was thinking too, for those who are listening, obviously the three of us, absolutely. I mean, I can see Bradley in my mind still get calls from him every now and then, on Facebook or whatever, yes. FaceTime. But, for some people, they may not understand quite the extent of his cerebral palsy because, that's a pretty wide spectrum. And he's fairly severe on that.
He is completely physically handicapped. He didn't start out that way. When he was young, you couldn't tell by looking that he was even handicapped. Mm-hmm. He would, sit Indian style, back straight and all that. Well, as the scoliosis took effect, it twisted him up. And now his legs, he can barely move them at all. And, and he is mentally retarded to an extent, but he is much more mentally capable than he is physically capable.
Sure.
He has always been either in a wheelchair or bed. That's his options. He's never, I think in the beginning when he was very young, he might have stood in a walker and pushed it around. Well, I know he did some things, but as he got older, his body became more severe.
And he's spoken through a computer, but he's not ever spoken
never spoken a word. He's just the sound that comes out is just kind of a holler or
mm-hmm.
And I've had people say, how do you know what he's saying? It's just because I've just
no, we've been around long enough.
We've learned to decipher the tea leaves.
That's right.
But of course he's a lot. There's one thing I would say that there's many things we have in common, but typically we wear our emotions on our sleeves. And I think we get that from Mom and maybe the Hayes side in general.
Probably so.
We don't have a good poker face. If something's wrong with him, you'll know it. And especially because he is typically in a pretty decent mood and thinks things are funny. But, and I think that's had an impact. But are there some specifics where, God showed up in this and has shown up in this that you would be specific? Maybe the first thing that come to mind, 2 or 3 things.
Well, you have to understand at the time I was raised in the church and was taught all the things that need to be taught to me, but at that time wasn't living as a Christian. And so when I look back at those times, I'm thinking, wow, God was working in my life even when I wasn't necessarily living for him. In that, I mean, I still knew in my heart and had been raised that you take care of your responsibilities. And even when I wasn't living like I should be living, I knew what my responsibility was. And that was to see that he got everything that he needed. And looking back all these years ago, I can just see so many ways in where God put people in my life, where we lived was a blessing because we had the Cerebral Palsy Center. We had the rehab center just over the river, just across the river from us. We were living exactly where we needed to be for his needs. And just things like that. And looking back, how God shielded me, I feel like when Bradley was in the hospital so many times on death's door, could have easily passed. He was never physically the size of a normal child. He was tiny and didn't eat good and all those times that I could have lost him. God shielded my mind from that. He just didn't let me go there. I just kept putting one foot in front of the other and taking care of what I had to do that day. And I've always looked back at that and thought that picture where were you, Jesus? Where were you, God? Well, I was carrying you.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where I feel he carried me through some mighty hard, dark nights and times. And then when I did, of course, get my life right with him, it became easier because I could feel his love and I let it in and let it guide me.
What would be, so we get the diagnosis, what would be the next, obviously every day is a struggle, but what would be the next event kind of in his life that
Bradley was, pretty healthy. In fact, Ben, I remember your dad saying to me the day he was born, he may not remember it, but he said this, I never will forget. That's the healthiest looking baby I've ever seen. And I thought, I just, swelled with pride, And it was soon after that it became apparent. But we figured out one time, right before he went into the nursing home, he was 17 and a half when he went to the nursing home. And right before that, we figured up that he was in the hospital 10 times in 4 years.
Wow.
So it was a constant trip to the hospital. Travis and Kevin could get a stomach virus or whatever, cold, whatever it be, and they'd be all right in a few days. And it would be a trip to the hospital with Bradley. You have to understand, at 17 and a half, he weighed 48 pounds.
Wow.
Kevin was 6, and that's what he weighed. So he was very, very weak. He never could eat good. He never gained weight. He was just so very, very tiny. And the major thing that happened the reason he ended up in the nursing home was, as the scoliosis got worse, it began to, in anybody that's ever dealt with scoliosis, it curvature of the spine. And it eventually will cut into their lungs and it will take their life. And so it became apparent we were going to have to do something. And so they decided that in 1992, in April, he went into Birmingham Hospital to have surgery, and very major surgery. And he came home in a body cast. And by that time I was living alone with my 3 children and working 6 days a week, and was carrying him up trailer steps and ramp up trailer steps, and very, very hard time. And that was the first time I just broke down and I just didn't know what I was going to do. He wasn't eating at all by that time, and was, like I said, in that body cast. And I remember distinctly one day going to pick him up off the couch, and he looked up at me like, "Mama, I'm sorry, you have to do this." And I just took him and laid him down and went in the other room and just bawled my eyes out. And the next day I went to River Bend, and I told the lady there, I said, "My son's going to die." I said, I don't know what to do. And she said, well, and this is when he went in the nursing home. There are so many, many stories. So many stories that I could tell, but this is the one where he was taken from my home. I mean, that's when the decision was made that he needed to go somewhere else. And I like I said, he weighed 48 pounds. He had no weight to lose. And so I knew that he was very, very ill. And so I went to River Bend, and the lady, the lady there that met with me said, I have a child who's handicapped. And I never will forget. It was just like, to me, it was like, somebody understands. And that's another God thing.
Yeah.
Because she got it. She knew, I can send somebody to diagnose, to observe your living situation and make a diagnosis of what needs to be done. And so I never will forget this lady come in, and she was very serious. She was asked me this, that, and the other about the situation. And I told her that I had, worked 6 days a week and had 2 other children, and she never smiled. She never encouraged, and she just write. And I thought, no feedback at all. And she left my house, and she called back 2 days later, and she said, "Your son needs 24-hour care. You can't give it to him. He needs to be in a nursing home," which was devastating news to me. But I knew I was at the point I can't do anymore. I'm done, because my boys weren't old enough and big enough to help me. And so that was a detrimental part, but so many other things, the seizures, the surgeries, always being sick, something going on, accidents at school, whatever it may be. There was just always something. And my other boys couldn't live a normal life. Bradley hated the heat. He hated the surf. He hated to be outside in the sun. He couldn't be out in the cold. And so it affected our whole life.
Just want to take a moment as we get ready to ask the final question to our guests to encourage you, if you are in the market or looking to create your own podcast, to look at Anchor. That's what we use. As you listen, you may be thinking, if these 2 guys can do it, then anybody can, and that's absolutely true with Anchor. The best part is it's free. There's plenty of creation tools that allow you to record, edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. You can also contact and have your guest on from different locations or right there in the room with you. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you. It can be on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. What is your emotional movie or TV moment? I probably could throw some out there for you. I've seen.
Steel Magnolias. Y'all probably don't know anything about it. It's one of the best movies ever. And it's when she realizes her daughter is she's got a daughter that's got, is diabetic, and she's in a diabetic coma, and they have her on a life support. She has to let her go. And that's very, very hard for me. Of course, living with the fact that I could lose my child at any time puts me there, and how I would have dealt with that. So that's my emotional thing. But if they laugh, basically, if I'm watching a movie, if they laugh, I laugh. If they cry, I cry. That's it. It's all over me. I'm going to cry. And Travis's dad used to like looking and say, "Are you crying?" Oh, it'd make me so mad because yes, I'm crying. They're crying. I'm crying. Don't make fun of me.
Well, the funny thing to me is how we all laugh at physical comedy. You would think with Bradley and his physical limitations that when people hurt themselves physically, the physical gags, people falling through stuff, falling off stuff, the America's Funniest Home Videos,
he's the first one laughing.
He wouldn't think
every time.
Funny, but yeah, and he's, you think he'd be, sometimes I've had to make sure he was okay because, he's not drawing a breath. It's just his mouth open with a smile on it. And you're thinking, okay, don't
he's
die on us. I guess if there's a way to go, that would be one way to go. Thanks for being with us. Hope to see you next time. Same Batify time, same Batify channel.